Hi, welcome to Venus Rising. Today I want to talk about the lenses that we see ourselves through. And this was highlighted to me yesterday. Long story short, I had got an offer to have for a contract for some work I was going to do. And I filled out the paperwork and did all of the things. And I had actually worked for this company for 8 years part time in the past. And they had reached out and offered this contract to me, and I accepted. And a few weeks before it was supposed to start, I got a phone call that they had given the contract to somebody else right out from under me. So, whatever, let it go. Figured it was for the best. And then yesterday I get a phone call that apparently the person they gave it to decided they weren't going to do it, and now they want me to do it. So I told them I would think about it, but it kind of gives me cause to reflect a little bit, just because I was thinking back on my life and thinking about how many times I was an option. I wasn't the real deal. I was the option. So I told them I would think about it, but I'm kind of the mind right now that I'm not going to take that contract. So I think that maybe there was a reason I didn't get it, which is funny because it does kind of make me think about what I wanted to talk about with you all tonight. So in my first video, I had my stack of journals that I documented my twin flame journey on. So this is the green journal. I love this journal. It's like all peeling apart, and there are little like green specks all over my table. But this is the first journal that I completed at the beginning of my twin flame journey. So so I sat down after I recorded my first video, and I went back through and I read some of it. So this journal starts at the very beginning when I found out what twin flames were, because I had never heard of twin flames in my life until this whole episode started. So I'm going to give you a little bit of the backstory. I'm not going to go into too much detail. But obviously, I was awakened to the twin flame journey because of a failed relationship, right? I was in this relationship, and it wasn't a long relationship. It wasn't a particularly deep relationship, but it was fast and furious. When this relationship ended, I was just distraught. I mean, dark night of the soul, whole 9 yards. And it went on for like a year. I mean, I was just devastated. And even a year later, the summer after we had broken up, even if someone mentioned his name to me, I would just burst out in tears. I would just be weeping. I would lay in bed every night thinking about, like, how do I get him back? Like, how do I get him to come back? And it was just, I knew it was wrong. I did everything that you're supposed to do when you're trying to get over a breakup. I went on trips. I was out with my friends. I did all of it. But I just couldn't get past it. So the summer of 2019, and I at the time I was working at a school district, so I was off in the summers. A lot of time to think, right? So I sat down and I wrote him a letter, and it was everything I wanted to say to him, like, how I thought everything was unfair and he didn't give a chance and he really didn't try, and like all this stuff. And it was like a four page letter. So as soon as I put this letter in the mailbox, it was almost like all of my wounding was like, boom, right in front of my face. Like I could see it. And I was like, oh my God, I should not have sent that letter. Like I could see it clear as day. All of my own, wounding and all of the karma that I brought to the table, it was all right in front of me. So I had even a bigger meltdown. So I got to a point, I was like, I'm of the age that I am. I'm not going to say at this time. And I'm still single, not with anyone. I was like, I have to fix this once and for all. So I did decide to go into therapy. So I'd never been into therapy, but I've never been in therapy before. I'm a mental health professional. I made a career out of intellectualizing all of this stuff. Um, so I thought that it was time, that this relationship that I had tried so hard at, and I still, like, all of these issues were still coming up. So I made a therapy appointment. It's not easy to get an appointment for therapy. It took me weeks to find somebody, and then I made the appointment for mid-ish July. So maybe about a week, less than a week before the therapy appointment, I went down to the beach with a friend of mine, and we were on the beach. Now, I wasn't really talking much about this person. I was feeling it still, like really feeling the pain and the despair and the loss of this relationship. But I kind of got to a point where I was like, people are tired of hearing about it. There's something wrong, that I'm not over this yet. So I'm on the beach with a very dear friend of mine, and we she says to me, she says, "Oh, well, there's a tarot reader, in the next town over. Why don't we drive over, and we'll go get lunch, and we'll go get our cards read." And I was like, okay, whatever. Like, it was, something to do. Now, I mean, I'd been to tarot readers before. I was always a little bit um curious about it, but it was mostly just for fun. So I went and I got this tarot reading done. So she was like, she put the cards out on the table, and she was talking about things, and it seemed pretty accurate. And then she goes over to the one side of the table and she says, "Who's this person?" And I was like, what do you mean? She's like, "The initials start with an M." I was like, oh boy, here we go. And she says to me, she says, "You have to fix this. Nobody else is coming for you. You're going to be alone for the rest of your life if you do not fix this relationship." Well, I was just in tears, because at that point, he wouldn't talk to me. He had blocked my number. Like, it just was like the guillotine went down, and I was totally cut out of his life. I was just like, I was crying. I was like, "Oh my gosh." She's like, what went wrong? Like, what did you do?" And then she proceeds to tell me that all my chakras were imbalanced, my third eye was blocked, and my aura was a mess. And she said that I needed to work with her for $350 so that she could help clear all this up for me, so that I could win back the man of my dreams. Well, I was livid. I was furious. So I walked out, and my friend was waiting for me, and she's like, "What did she say? What did she say?" And I was just mad. I was like, "She's a scam artist. She's just trying to take my money. Like, she's a crook," all this stuff. I was so angry. I couldn't, I drove all the way home, and I was just going on and on and on about how much of a scammer this tarot reader was. So that was on like a Thursday, and I couldn't let it go. Like, I just couldn't. Like, I kept, like, I feel this way. Like, I can't get over it. She's telling me there's nobody else coming, and I'm like, what am I going to do? So I decided I needed a second opinion. So I came home and I Googled tarot readers near my area, and I found one that was like a half mile away. I actually drive by there, like, at least 3 times a week, because it's so close to my house. And her name was Penelope. So I went to Penelope, and it was interesting, because my first therapy session was scheduled for the same day. So was scheduled for my therapy session at 9 a.m. and then I was scheduled for Penelope at 1 p.m. So I went to the therapy session, a mess. Like, this poor woman, she had just started her practice. I've been in the field a long time, and so I disclosed that. So I could tell she was a little bit intimidated, just because, like, I mean, I'm intimidated when I work with people that are in the field, just because, you got to, It's just a thing. So, and I'm just bawling my eyes out during this poor woman is trying to do the intake, and I'm just crying my eyes out over this guy. And, got through that, went home, and then I went to see Penelope. So I sat down, and she spreads the cards, and all of this stuff, the preceding stuff that the other tarot reader told me, she told me the same thing. And it was about like my work, and that there was this businessman that was going to come in and help me with something. And that actually happened, as far as like, some financial things. And then she gets over to that other side of the table, and she says, "Who's this person?" And she says, "You have to fix this. There's nobody else coming for you. There's no one else in your energy." She was like, "He's the one." And then that was when she said it. She said, "Have you ever heard of twin flames?" And I said, "No, I've never heard of that." And she said, "I think you should go home and research it." And she said that me and this gentleman had past lives together, and she said that I needed to will him back to me, and that I could will him back to me. So I was like, oh, here we go again. So she tells me the same thing. My third eye was blocked, my chakras are imbalanced, and my aura needs cleansing, and like all this other good stuff. So, so she offered to work with me, and I said, I need to go home and think about it. So I went home and I thought about it, and I started researching twin flames and researching the stages of twin flames. Now, back then I could have recited them word for word. I know what they are, but anyway, it all made sense. So I decided to work with Penelope. I decided to do it. At that point, I was just feeling so distraught still, and so bad about everything, that I figured, what do I have to lose at this point? So I reached out to her, and so basically what we did was we did like this week-long ritual, and she gave me 2 candles to light. They were dressed and all that stuff that 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 people do with that kind of stuff. And every night at 7 p.m. I lit the candles and texted her. She went into meditation. So it was this whole thing. So that was where the green book started. So I have always connected by writing. I've always been a journaler. I've always written poetry, little short stories, little essays just about experiences that I've had, and it's just a way that I process things. So when I lit the candles, I started to practice meditation and affirmations. So I started to do a meditation to Archangel Michael. So that was my first time. And I still call out to Archangel Michael. I still give gratitude and call in Archangel Michael. He's definitely someone that I do work with him on a pretty frequent basis, even though I've not been very active like with the twin flame journey for the past probably like 4 years. But maybe 3 years, maybe, I don't remember. It's all a blur a little bit. But so I would light the candles, and then I would write. And what I did was, every night of this process, I wrote him a letter. And so like I ran through these letters, and this whole, even after the week was over, that we did it for 7 days. Like the letters that I wrote him were all about what I thought he wanted to hear. And at the time, like I really and truly meant it, because the whole goal of this was to get him back, was to have him back as in a relationship with me. But obviously, and anyone who's been on the twin flame journey, so that what you have to do is that you have to heal. You have to raise your vibration, and you have to be in alignment for what's meant for you. However, the whole goal of what most of us divine feminines do, considering we're the chasers, everything is done for the purpose of getting back into union with your twin flames. So like, is that healed? I don't know. when I went back and I read through, and they're very sweet letters that I wrote to him, but I wasn't healed when I wrote this stuff. And it wasn't, I mean, it was me because it was everything I felt at the time. But like, going back through it now, I was like, this was all about him. None of it was about me. So anyway, that was just something that I noticed. So, I mean, and through here, like I have all kinds of like, like little things that I wrote as I was like researching the journey. Just signs and synchronicities that like parallels in our lives. And there are some really sweet ones that really convinced me that this man was my divine masculine. But anyway, so come to the end of the journey, or the end of this week long, like, I guess like ritual is the best way to put it. It really freaked me out a little bit. So the last night of it, we were done, and then I went into the kitchen and I was cleaning up my dinner dishes. And I just all of a sudden felt this like wave of despair, like I've never felt before. And I think that because we were doing that ritual, I felt like I was doing something, and I did feel connected to him when I was doing it. But I just broke down. I'm talking fetal position on my kitchen floor. And as I'm sitting there, just a mess, I get a text from Penelope, and she says, "Are you okay? I can feel you." And I was like, whoa. So anyway, that was basically how I learned about twin flames, and that was the beginning of my journey. And like I went through the motions, but I really did. I really did take it seriously. I was like, I'm going to do this, like what's the worst that can happen? I raise my vibration, and maybe I do some healing and I get into alignment, and, but the sole purpose of me doing all of that was to win this person back that didn't want to be in a relationship with me. He made it very clear. So that's something that always kind of like, it was kind of right there in my mind, when, especially once I started going into the rabbit hole of the tarot readers on YouTube, which that's gonna be another video. I would read the comments of, the people that were posting, and the people that were the people that were commenting, the people that were following these readers. Like most of us were the chasers, right? We were there listening to these tarot readings because we wanted someone to tell us that, our divine masculine was on his way back, like he was coming back. And when was he coming back? And most of the divine masculines of the people that I interacted with were in other relationships, or they were married, or so I don't know, like I just always kind of felt a little bit uneasy about that, because I just felt like, if you have people who are vulnerable and they get into this mindset that, win him back no matter what, it could cause some people some harm. So I always kind of had a concern about that. So I always felt like, eventually, when I stepped into mission, I would be working with the feminines, and that's what I'm here to do. And one thing that I will say about where I am now is I'm unapologetically honest. And, and I'm not going to say all this stuff wasn't real. It all felt real at the time, and it was something that I went through. But, I definitely, I definitely like going back and reading through this, and the mindset that I was in. And it took me a while. Like I went through like another month of just like really, really pretty deep despair, like in the journal entries that I had put. And then I stopped. I kind of stopped reading because I got to the point where I started to really kind of like, things I want to talk about in other videos. So like some of the positive things. So this is still kind of in the dark era. But I did want to shout out one of the readers, just because like I've recently she hasn't been live in a while, and it's Lucy over at the Channel of Love and Journey of Ascension. And I've been on a couple of her lives, and I'll talk about her when I get to that video that I make for the tarot readers. But it was good. It was good to reconnect with her in that way, because she was a dear friend. But I'm kind of at that point again, though. Like I did mention that, I've been through like a pretty significant tower moment, and I'm having to rebuild my life again. And I definitely need to raise my vibration, and I need to get back in alignment with, what I'm destined for. Because I do believe that. Like I do believe in all of that. But it was interesting because, another thing that happened recently. So I went on a podcast. So a friend, had hooked me up with this podcaster, and like I had a conversation with him, and he's really into like trauma, and that's kind of, it's one of the things that one of the populations I work with is something I'm very passionate about, which also ties into this whole twin flame thing as well. But so I went on this podcast, and when it was done, the guy was great. Like he was so nice, and it was a lot of fun. But excuse me, I was a little bit taken aback because like I kind of was under the impression that I was going on this podcast as like an expert in my field, and to talk about my experiences working with kids. And I did talk about those things. But a lot of it was about like my childhood and like all these wounds that I know are there. And I was feeling some kind of way about it. So I did listen to it when it first came out. And then last week I was like, you know what? I want to send this to somebody. And I was going to send it to a dear friend of mine, just to give, because I didn't send it out to anyone to listen to. But I listened back, and, like the first 5 seconds of me speaking was talking about my own trauma. So like I put myself out there as a victim. And I think that that's the message for today. If you're a victim, what are you a victim of? Like, honestly, for me, like in that moment, I was a victim of myself and my own inability to see beyond the bad things that have happened to me in my life. So that's the moral of the story. So yeah, so that's the beginning of my journey, and it's just part of what I want to kind of pick apart, is the lens that we see ourselves through, because it definitely affects the way people see us. You always hear these sayings like, you teach people how to treat you, but I think that what you project out in the world, that definitely affects the way people view you. So and I'm definitely more cognizant of that. And especially going back, when you see yourself on a video talking, and I'm like, I didn't want to talk about all of that, but I just offered it up right in the very beginning. And the interviewer, obviously, he ran with it, and he asked his questions. So that's that. Just a little something. So yeah, so I do have a lot more to share, a lot more. I think that as we go along, it'll come together. And I was so annoyed. I bought this microphone, and I hooked it up, and it's not working. So I've got these earbuds in. We'll see. But I do hope that if you've stuck around this far, that you'll continue to stick around. I do have some things planned, but I'm not going to say what they are. Plans for the channel, the way that I see it unfolding. And it's going to be, I guess, a vlog-ish. I've rebuilt my life a couple of times already, and I've got some plans to do it again. So, journal and video documenting, maybe, we'll see. I don't know, but I'm so glad that you stopped by, and see you soon.